Blood-stained concrete. This is the result of 35 bodies dumped on a Mexican highway during rush hour traffic.
This wasn't some random gang violence.
He's a person that we would consider as public enemy number one.
That is the U.S. government reward just increased and placed on the head of Ruben Oseguera Cervantes, alias El Mencho.
35 bodies unloaded right in front of Mexico's largest mall while commuters watched in horror. And that massacre was merely the opening act of how a single individual dismantled the scariest crime syndicate in Mexican history. It wasn't random chaos. It was El Mencho broadcasting a message to the globe that Los Zetas, those military-trained butchers who had the government shaking, were actually vulnerable. And he was getting ready to prove that fact with absolute savagery. Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, known on the streets as El Mencho, didn't just beat the Zetas at their own game. He wiped them off the map, seized their turf, and constructed the most formidable criminal dynasty Mexico has ever witnessed. So how on earth did a mid-tier muscle man who got chased out of his home state manage to topple a cabal of special forces operators? Let me spell it out for you, because this tale is absolutely bananas, and it completely shifted the paradigm of how cartels function. Let's dial it back to the early 2000s. The Zetas weren't your average hustlers pushing product on street corners. These guys were legitimate military experts who figured out that the cartel life paid way better than a soldier's salary. We are talking about 30 top-tier Mexican special ops troops, GAFE commandos who learned counterinsurgency and urban warfare directly from American Green Berets. When those operators went AWOL to enforce for OCL Cardenas Guillen of the Gulf Cartel back in the late 90s, they provided way more than just muscle. They completely rewrote the rulebook. These weren't your garden variety thugs. They introduced military-grade discipline, high-level tactics, and a brand of cruelty that made every other crew look like a bunch of amateurs. By 2003, the Zetas were so dominant they rolled into Michoacan like an invading army. They systematically took apart the competition, pushing out the Valencia family's Milenio cartel, which was essentially royalty in the Western underworld at the time. Armando Valencia got cuffs slapped on him, and the survivors scattered north to find sanctuary. Among those running was our guy, Nemesio Oseguera Cervantes, El Mencho. He was just a hired gun and a protector for the Valencias when the Zetas hit them like a hurricane. Mencho saw his entire world collapse. He witnessed firsthand what actual military force looks like when it's turned into a business model. But the biggest takeaway was a lesson that would flip the script later on. The Zetas weren't gods. You could fight them, you could break them, but that epiphany had to wait. In 2003, Mencho was just trying to stay breathing through the terror. Fast forward to 2009, and the Zetas had split from the Gulf Cartel to run their own show. These dudes had a stranglehold on huge chunks of eastern and central Mexico. Their grip reached from Tamaulipas on the American border all the way down to Guatemala. They had transformed into the most terrifying outfit in the history of the country. The Zetas ran their plazas using absolute fear. We're talking public executions, mass burial sites, and torture clips shared online as warnings. They shook down businesses, snatched civilians, and flatlined anybody who looked at them wrong. Cops, soldiers, rivals, it didn't matter. Cross the Zetas, and you vanish. The government was losing its mind trying to stop them. Regular beat cops were too petrified to engage. Even the army struggled with these guys because the Zetas knew the playbook better than the soldiers sent to catch them. The Zetas seemed untouchable. Then, things started getting weird down in Veracruz. Corpses started showing up with notes attached. But not the standard cartel threats. These were different. These notes were a declaration of war against the Zetas specifically. They vowed to track them down, to wipe them out, and to scrub Mexico clean of their presence. Cancun, Quintana Roo, 2009. Authorities find 3 stiff bodies inside a white van parked near the hotel strip. There was a note taped to the windshield that said, "We are the new squad, the Mata Zetas, the Zeta Killers." We stand against kidnapping and extortion, and we will battle them in every state for a cleaner Mexico. The Mata Zetas. Mexican federal agents were scratching their heads. They had zero clue who this new faction was. The intel files were empty. No prior hits fit their MO. It was like they just popped into existence out of thin air. But on the street, the rumors were flying. This wasn't a fresh crew. It was a rebrand. The Sinaloa Cartel, run by El Chapo Guzman, decided the Zetas had pushed their luck too far. They were encroaching on Sinaloa turf, messing with supply lines, and bringing way too much heat from American agencies with their over-the-top violence. So, Sinaloa built a paramilitary unit with one specific purpose: to hunt the hunters. They scraped together the leftovers of the Mencho cartel, pulled seasoned gunmen from Jalisco and Michoacan, and gave them a single objective: drive Los Zetas out. And the man calling the shots for this new force was El Mencho, the same guy who had to run from Michoacan when the Zetas rolled in back in 2003 was now being asked to take them on directly. But this time, he had backup. This time, he had the gear. And most crucially, this time he had a strategy. This is where Mencho proved he wasn't just another cartel boss. He grasped a fundamental concept that the guys before him had completely missed. Public image mattered. Los Zetas had managed to make themselves universally despised. They didn't just move drugs, they terrorized whole communities. They snatched teachers, shook down small businesses, and strung bodies from overpasses to scare the hell out of civilians. Mencho looked at that and saw an opening. If Los Mata Zetas branded themselves as the people's defenders, they could gain something the Zetas never had: community support, or at the very least, indifference. When Los Mata Zetas took someone out, the locals wouldn't run to report it. When they needed to lay low, people wouldn't help the police hunt them down. So, the propaganda machine kicked into gear. Every body they dumped came with a note stressing that Los Mata Zetas didn't extort, didn't kidnap, and didn't hurt innocent people. They claimed they were scrubbing Mexico clean of the Zeta plague. They painted themselves as necessary vigilantes in a state that couldn't keep its own citizens safe. Was it true? Not a chance. Los Mata Zetas were a criminal syndicate just like the Zetas. But the facts didn't matter nearly as much as the story. And that story was simple. The Zetas were foreign invaders bringing chaos. Los Mata Zetas were local defenders restoring order. It was brilliant psychological warfare. And things were about to escalate in a big way. The Veracruz offensive. To get why the war zeroed in on Veracruz, you have to understand the map of the Mexican drug trade. Veracruz sits right on the Gulf of Mexico, home to the country's largest port outside of Tampico. It's perfectly positioned to bring in cocaine shipments from South America and funnel them north to the United States. It also serves as the gateway to Mexico City and the central region. The Zetas had run Veracruz since the mid-2000s, turning it into one of their biggest moneymakers. The port meant drugs, sure, but it also meant they could bring in weapons. Being that close to Mexico City meant they could shake down major corporations. The strategic location meant that controlling Veracruz basically gave you leverage over half of Mexico. But here's the real story. Mencho understood that Veracruz wasn't just important, it was vital. If he could wrestle it away from the Zetas, he would hit 3 birds with 1 stone. Prove Los Mata Zetas could crush the Zetas in a head-to-head fight, lock down a critical smuggling route, and cement his own organization as a legitimate heavyweight in the Mexican underworld. But taking Veracruz wouldn't be a walk in the park. The Zetas didn't hold turf through kindness. They held it through extreme violence and political corruption. They had the state government right in their pocket. Local cops took orders from them, and any pushback was met with instant, brutal payback. Throughout 2010 and early 2011, Los Mata Zetas ran a guerrilla campaign in Veracruz. Small-scale hits, targeted assassinations, ambushes on Zeta convoys. They weren't trying to seize land just yet. They were probing defenses, timing responses, and learning the Zetas' patterns. Then, Bodies started showing up a lot more often. These weren't random murders, they were strategic eliminations. Zeta Plaza bosses, local enforcers, anyone collecting protection money. The message was consistent every time. Veracruz is under new management. The Zetas responded exactly as expected with overwhelming force. But this is where Mencho's strategy really paid off. Every time the Zetas struck back at suspected Mata Zetas collaborators, they ended up killing civilians. Every time they left bodies as warnings, they just reinforced the narrative that they were the villains. Every violent act drove the population further away from them. Meanwhile, Los Mata Zetas played it smart. They only targeted Zeta members and their direct associates. When they left bodies behind, the notes highlighted the victims' criminal records. They framed every killing as justice, not terrorism. By the middle of 2011, the situation in Veracruz was falling apart fast. Gun battles were popping off in broad daylight. Bodies were turning up almost daily. Federal police struggled to keep any kind of order. The state government, compromised by the Zetas for years, couldn't even protect its own officials. And then, in September 2011, Mencho decided it was time to make a statement so dramatic, so shocking, that nobody in Mexico would ever forget it. It was a Tuesday afternoon, rush hour in Boca del Rio. In the affluent outskirts of Veracruz City, a hub for middle-class life, the country's biggest mall drew in massive crowds daily. The Voladores de Papantla monument watched over the heavy traffic where Adolfo Ruiz Cortines Boulevard intersected with the main highway. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon. A pair of heavy-duty pickups braked under the bridge right by the mall, while a convoy of backup cars boxed them in to secure the zone. Guys decked out in combat fatigues and tactical vests spilled out of the trucks. Drivers nearby knew exactly what was going down. It was a cartel hit. Commuters scrambled for their smartphones, frantically typing out alerts on Twitter. Avoid the Voladores monument. Roadblock with gunmen. These aren't cops or military. High risk. The crew moved fast, dropping the tailgates on the trucks and starting to haul out the cargo human remains. There was no respect for the dead. They tossed the corpses onto the asphalt, wrists shackled behind them, stripped naked for maximum shame, heads bagged in black plastic. The victims bore the grisly marks of interrogation. Burns, cuts, and severe beatings. In just a few minutes, 35 corpses were stacked up under the highway bridge. The squad left the pile right where everyone could see it, facing the mall, the avenue, and the suburban homes. They didn't bury this in the middle of nowhere. They staged it at the city's busiest spot during rush hour, right when thousands of commuters were rolling by. Before peeling out, they draped a white banner from the bridge with a stark message in black ink. This is the fate of every Zeta remaining in Veracruz. The territory has a new boss, GN. Take a look at El Ferris and his entourage. GN referred to the New People, a hit squad linked to the Sinaloa Federation. El Ferris was Felipe Ferra Gomez, a lieutenant for the Zetas who famously got elected Carnival King during a Mardi Gras party inside the prison that was meant to be holding him. The implication didn't need spelling out. Your command structure is gone. You're done. Veracruz is ours. And just like that, the operators vanished. It took the cops over an hour to lock down the site, but by then, hundreds of bystanders had already snapped photos of the carnage. The pictures went viral instantly, while news choppers hovered above, streaming the horror live. TVs across the nation broadcast the gruesome mound of humanity, the single biggest body dump the country had ever seen. That was just the start of the fallout. When the feds ran the IDs, it turned out all 35 victims had rap sheets. They were part of the Zetas' machine muscle. Spies, bagmen collecting protection fees, and women handling the dirty money. The count included 12 women and 2 teenagers, proving the Mata Zetas didn't care about gender or age. Affiliation meant death. The autopsy files painted a grim picture of their final moments. Most were choked out or bludgeoned. Others had endured long sessions of pain. Only one got a quick bullet to the head. Every single one died defenseless in restraints. The political blowback hit instantly. Reynaldo Escobar Perez, the state attorney general, stepped down within 24 hours. He'd failed to stop the Zetas, but at least they usually kept their business underground. This new faction was running tactical raids at the mall in the middle of the day. He couldn't survive that kind of public failure. The day he quit, 10 more corpses showed up across the city. Then, on October 6th, barely a fortnight after the first slaughter, police found 36 more bodies stash-housed in Boca del Rio, 20 in one house, 11 in the next, 1 in a third location, plus 4 more confirmed later. On October 7th, the Mata Zetas group racked up 67 kills across the state in one day. This wasn't random chaos. It was a calculated purge of the Zetas' entire network. Every street watcher, every bagman, every district boss, and anyone who'd ever collaborated. The signal was loud and clear. The Zetas' grip on Veracruz was broken. The battle was decided, and the whole country watched it play out on the evening news. A week after the September 27, 2011 massacre, a clip surfaced on Blog del Narco, the go-to site for underworld intel. The production value was high, slick editing, professional camera work, and perfect timing. The frame focused on 5 figures behind a desk, faces hidden by black ski masks. They were geared up in all-black tactical kits. Take away the context, and you'd swear they were special ops. One guy held the mic, delivering a statement in crisp, deliberate Spanish. He didn't sound like a thug, he sounded like a commanding officer. We go by the Mata Zetas, soldiers who hide our faces but stand tall for our country. Our single goal is wiping the Zetas off the map. He took a breath before adding that they honor the nation's military. We get where the state stands on organized crime and accept their refusal to cut deals with groups like us. We accept that reality. This part of the speech was absolutely vital. By bowing to federal authority, the group framed themselves as partners in the fight rather than just another gang. They were tipping their hats to the law while acting completely outside its boundaries. The speaker went on to say their members are banned from shakedowns, abductions, theft, or hurting innocent people, claiming they never harmed the country's heritage. He called them the fighting force for the citizens. That specific tagline was pure marketing genius. They weren't pitching themselves as outlaws, but as Avengers Guardians rather than terrorists. The difference between them and the Zetas was night and day. Then he dropped the admission the public expected. We're sorry for the bloodshed in Veracruz, but our war against the enemy won't stop. They can be beaten. We're going to scrub the nation clean of them. They aren't untouchable. With those 4 words, the Mata Zetas destroyed the aura of fear the rival cartel had cultivated for 10 years. The scariest outfit in the country's past wasn't just vulnerable, they were actively losing, and Veracruz proved it. The clip exploded online nationwide, racking up millions of views. Anchors dissected the footage while underworld groups paid close attention, realizing these newcomers had achieved the impossible. They had handed the Zetas a massive public embarrassment and walked away unscathed. Following the win in Veracruz, El Mencho hit a crossroads, deciding the vigilante brand had done its job. They showed the enemy bleeds and seized major turf, but the Zeta Killer label felt too restrictive. It tethered their identity to their rivals. To really dominate the underworld, they had to grow beyond that. Toward the end of 2011, the group formally changed their banner to the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, known as the CJNG. The fresh title carried multiple layers of meaning. It planted their flag in Jalisco and framed them as a modern force, separate from the dinosaurs of the past. They weren't just a hit squad anymore. They were a full-fledged syndicate. The schedule aligned perfectly. As 2011 closed, CJNG had showcased their combat skills, mastery of fear tactics, and control over key zones. The next step was constructing an empire built to last. El Mencho started tightening his grip, knowing he first had to squash local rivals. After the Milenio cartel fell apart, it splintered, with the Mata Zetas emerging as one shard. Another piece was La Resistencia, run by Ramiro Pozos. Funny enough, the Sinaloa Federation originally built that crew to fight off the Zetas. But when the Mata Zetas showed they were the sharper tool, the bosses took notice, and suddenly, La Resistencia was the odd man out. Adding insult to injury, they briefly teamed up with the Zetas, the exact group they were born to destroy. It wasn't about beliefs or tactics. It was pure desperation. La Resistencia saw CJNG blowing up and knew they'd be crushed if they didn't find heavy hitters to back them. The clash that followed set Jalisco and nearby regions on fire throughout 2011 and 2012. Corpses started piling up, often pinned with threatening notes from both sides. Firefights broke out in downtown areas. Cars exploded, and politicians stuck in the middle were taken out. By the summer of 2012, CJNG secured a total knockout. The opposition's bosses were either in handcuffs or in the ground. Their turf was swallowed up, and their smuggling lanes became new assets for the victors. Best of all, they inherited the entire logistics web of the old Milenio cartel infrastructure that took 30 years to establish. With the resistance crushed and the Zetas kicked out of Veracruz, the group locked down a vital path stretching from the Pacific, cutting through Jalisco, all the way to the Gulf. They touched 2 oceans, letting them bring product up from South America on either side, while holding the prime spots for moving it north to the U.S. El Mencho knew winning battles was pointless without the financial plumbing to back it up. You can own the whole map, but if you can't wash the cash, enforce collections, or wire profits across borders, the weight of your own growth will crush you. His fix was genius. Keep it in the family, specifically his brothers-in-law. Enter the Gonzalez Valencia clan, the masterminds behind Los Cuinis, arguably the most advanced treasury department in the Mexican underworld. These guys weren't pulling triggers or pushing product. Their weapon of choice was liquidity. Los Cuinis were absolute pros at washing cash, leveraging a sprawling network of front companies spanning Mexico, South America, and the States. They understood the ins and outs of global finance and how to navigate shell corporations, capitalizing on shady bankers ready to ignore regulations for a cut of the action. It was a match made in hell. While CJNG brought the firepower and locked down the turf, Los Cuinis managed the books, ensuring revenue got scrubbed, stashed, and put back to work. Abigail Gonzalez Valencia, El Mencho's own brother-in-law, stepped up as the de facto CFO. This alliance gave the cartel the fuel it needed to explode in size. Suddenly, they had the budget to hire armies, secure military-grade hardware, grease palms, and push into fresh territory. By 2013, intelligence reports pegged their combined war chest at somewhere north of $20 billion. El Mencho alone was rumored to be sitting on a personal fortune between $500 million and $1 billion, ranking him among the richest fugitives alive. But you wouldn't see him flashing it. Unlike the stereotypical kingpins with their tigers and gold-plated pistols, Mencho stayed in the shadows. He kept his head down, lived simply, and never stayed in one place long enough to be found. To really get why the Zetas crumbled before CJNG, you have to look at the internal rot plaguing the Zetas first. It wasn't a straight-up brawl that finished them. They were already bleeding out before the new challengers even arrived. Back in 2007, when President Calderon kicked off the drug war, the Zetas were marked as public enemy number 1. Their brutality was so over the top that the Mexican state, backed by American intel, made wiping them out their main objective. From 2008 to 2014, federal forces methodically hunted down the Zetas' original hierarchy. We're talking about the original 30 deserters, elite commandos, who applied military discipline to organized crime. They were picked off, one after another. The issue was that the Zetas' entire edge relied on that specialized training. Once those special forces veterans were gone, They had to fill the ranks with standard street thugs. Standards dropped. They began drafting kids, civilians, anyone willing to hold a gun, regardless of skill. The Zetas of 2014 were a pale shadow of the 2004 squad. The strict order and tactical genius were history, sure. They were still violent, maybe even more reckless, but that surgical precision was gone. In contrast, CJNG managed to keep its founding fathers intact. El Mencho stayed off the radar, and his inner circle remained operational. This allowed them to strategize for the future and compound their gains instead of scrambling to replace a boss every few months. That stability gave CJNG a massive leg up, not just over the Zetas, but against every rival faction in the country. While Sinaloa dealt with El Chapo's capture and the Zetas founders were killed or jailed, El Mencho was out there calling the shots. They didn't just adopt the old Milenio Cartel playbook. They rewrote it. Intel points to them bringing in bomb makers from the Colombian FARC to teach them how to build and use improvised explosives. They analyzed federal troop movements and figured out how to fight back effectively. Their armory got a serious upgrade too. They started with the standard AKs and AR-15s, but by 2015, they were packing Barrett 50 cals, RPGs, and squad automatic weapons. They were outgunning local law enforcement. Then came the shocker. On May 1st, 2015, in Jalisco, their operatives used a rocket-propelled grenade to take down a military helicopter, claiming the lives of 9 soldiers. It was a game-changer. Criminal groups weren't supposed to have anti-air capability until CJNG proved they did. A few weeks later, in Michoacán, they ambushed a state police convoy, leaving 15 officers dead and 5 wounded. It stands as one of the darkest days for Mexican security forces in recent memory. These weren't random shootings. They were calculated flexes. CJNG was showing the government that they were ready for total war. That kind of firepower made them the go-to partners for smaller gangs looking for backup. Maybe Mencho's smartest move was how he handled growth. Rather than trying to micromanage every new town, he set up a franchise system. Here is the breakdown. Picture a regional outfit in Guanajuato, holding down their turf but sweating under pressure from rivals. Then CJNG steps in with a partnership offer. The local crew could keep running the show, maintain their hierarchy, and hold on to their cash. But they had to fly the CJNG flag. They would operate under the cartel's umbrella and kick back a percentage of the take. In return, they got heavy weaponry, deep pockets, and the real game changer, the brand name. Being patched in meant enemies hesitated before making a move. It meant having serious muscle on speed dial. It meant belonging to the heaviest hitters in the Mexican underworld. This franchise strategy let the organization scale up at a breakneck pace. By 2020, they were active in 27 of Mexico's 32 states. 5 years later, they became the first group to plant their flag in every single one. They pulled off in 15 years what took the old guard decades to build. And they managed it without the headache of micromanaging every single street corner. See? Los Zetas tried to grip everything with an iron fist. That approach spread them too thin and left them exposed. CJNG was smarter. They outsourced the grunt work while keeping their hands on the steering wheel. It was organized crime run like a Fortune 500 company. While the Zetas were stuck on coke, weed, and shakedowns, El Mencho saw the jackpot, crystal meth. He picked up the trade back in the 90s while living out in California. He got the math. Meth is synthetic, no waiting on rain or harvest seasons. Plus, it is highly addictive, guaranteeing a steady stream of customers. Crucially, the appetite for it in the States was skyrocketing. So, the cartel went all in on cooking meth. They locked down the Manzanillo port in Colima, opening a direct pipeline for chemical ingredients from China and other Asian suppliers. They set up industrial-scale superlabs, pumping out tons of product, and laid down supply lines stretching all across the U.S. The money was absolutely insane. Meth offered fatter profit margins than cocaine and a customer base that never slept. By 2019, American DEA agents figured CJNG was moving up to 70% of the meth crossing the border. We are not talking about a majority share here. That is total market dominance. That cash bankrolled everything else, letting them pay their soldiers wages the competition couldn't match. They bought top-tier military gear. They bought off bigger politicians further up the food chain. The meth trade didn't just make them rich, it made them a juggernaut. On the flip side, the Zetas had branched out into kidnapping, extortion, and siphoning oil. Sure, that brought in cash, but it also brought a tidal wave of public hatred. While CJNG quietly stacked cash from smuggling, the Zetas were painting targets on their backs by terrorizing everyday folks. The loss in Veracruz was a major blow, but it wasn't the finale. The Zetas didn't just vanish into thin air. They pulled back, licked their wounds, and kept shooting. Between 2011 and 2019, data from Uppsala University shows 314 distinct firefights between the two groups. But the writing was on the wall. The Zetas were bleeding out, losing ground plaza by plaza. Strongholds turned into battlefields and then into CJNG property. By 2015, the Zetas had basically cracked into two warring camps. You had the old-school Zetas and the Northeast Cartel. Both claimed to be the real deal, the true heirs to the throne. But neither had the juice of the original empire. They wasted just as much ammo on each other as they did on outsiders. CJNG played them like a fiddle, teaming up with one side to crush the other, then turning around and wiping out their temporary friends. At the same time, whatever turf the Zetas had left was getting hammered by other gangs who smelled blood in the water. The Gulf Cartel snatched back land they had lost years prior. The Sinaloa Cartel started encroaching on their spots. Even small-time local crews felt brave enough to take a swing at them. The group that once terrified the entire Mexican state was now scrapping for its life against enemies on all sides. While the Zetas were imploding, CJNG was exploding across the map. They stormed into central Mexico, locking down Guanajuato, Querétaro, and chunks of Morelos. They rolled into Pacific states like Colima, Nayarit, and Guerrero. They even stepped into the Sinaloa cartel's backyard in Baja California, picking a fight with the biggest dogs in the yard. Every move followed the exact same playbook. Show up with heavy firepower, give the locals a simple choice, join the franchise or get wiped out, and prove they weren't bluffing by brutally destroying anyone who said no. The banners would go up announcing the new management. The corpses would turn up right after. Then the town belonged to them. The level of violence was off the charts. Back in 2018 and 2019, Guanajuato was the deadliest spot in Mexico, mostly due to the CJNG going head-to-head with the local Santa Rosa de Lima crew. By the time the New Generation Cartel finally crushed their rivals, they had put hundreds of people in the ground. But they also locked down one of the biggest money-making states in the country. Come 2020, experts figured the cartel's rackets were pulling in billions of dollars a year. They were pushing product into the States, Canada, Australia, and all over Asia, plus Europe. With a grip on major shipping hubs on both coasts, they had morphed into a bona fide global crime syndicate. As for the Zetas, they are still around, but they are just a shell of their former selves. Splinter groups hold on to scraps of turf in Tamaulipas, San Luis Potosí, and corners of Veracruz. They scrape by on shakedowns, street-level dealing, and siphoning gas, but they aren't calling the shots in the Mexican underworld anymore. Their collapse was total. Once the government took out their ex-military commanders, their tactical edge vanished. Then they lost their ground to the CJNG and other competitors. Even their terror tactics stopped working once the new generation proved the Zetas bleed just like everyone else. Worst of all, the whole structure crumbled, splintering into warring little gangs. On the flip side, the CJNG turned into exactly what El Mencho wanted, the undisputed kings of Mexican crime. By 2025, They were running ops in all 32 states, the first group to ever really go nationwide. They held more turf than any syndicate in the history of the country. Their influence got so scary that in February 2025, the U.S. slapped the CJNG with the Foreign Terrorist Organization label. It was the first time a Mexican cartel ever got hit with that tag, basically admitting this group was just as dangerous as outfits like Al-Qaeda or ISIS. The DOJ jacked up the bounty on El Mencho's head to $15 million, making him the top target in the entire Western Hemisphere. But even with massive search operations and entire DEA teams built just to hunt him down, and the combined spy networks of two nations looking for him, the guy stayed in the wind. Rumors kept swirling about his health, though. Back in 2022, word on the street was he died from lung failure at a private clinic in Guadalajara. That was never verified. Banners popped up claiming he was gone, but nobody ever produced a body. The authorities never confirmed it, and the cartel kept running with the same brutal efficiency as always. Whether Mencho is breathing or the group has a new boss, the machine he built is still on top. They aren't scrapping with the Zetas anymore. That fight was decided years back. Now they are locking horns with the Sinaloa cartel for the crown, warring over crucial crossing points like Tijuana and Ciudad Juarez. Statistics can't really explain the human misery of the CJNG Zeta conflict, but they give you an idea of the scale. From 2011 to 2019, the fighting left thousands dead across Veracruz, Jalisco, Michoacán, Guanajuato, and beyond. Just look at the Veracruz massacre in September 2011, 35 bodies dropped. By October, another 36 were killed, plus 67 more throughout the state. And those were just the headline-grabbing moments. Every single day saw smaller hits, kidnappings, and executions. Cops got caught in the crossfire. Regular folks were mistaken for gangsters. Reporters were targeted for covering the news, and politicians died for trying to keep the peace. Shopkeepers who wouldn't pay protection money, they all just ended up as numbers in the drug war body count. In March 2025, search parties found the bones of hundreds of recruits at a training camp in Jalisco. But these weren't rival cartel members. These were the cartel's own guys who washed out of training, stepped out of line, or just weren't useful anymore. They were slaughtering their own people on an industrial scale. The war that started back in 2009 never actually stopped. It just morphed into new battles against new bad guys, with the CJNG taking the Zeta's spot at the top of the food chain. The bloodshed didn't end. It got worse. Looking back at the CJNG Zeta feud teaches us a few things about power, strategy, and how these groups work. First off, having a scary reputation cuts both ways. The Zetas ran on terror, but that just made everyone despise them. When the new guys came for them, nobody lifted a finger to help the Zetas. People actually rooted for the challengers, even though they were just as crooked. Second, being flexible matters more than having big guns. The Zetas started out with better training, but once their commando leaders were taken out, they couldn't pivot. The CJNG's franchise setup turned out to be way tougher to break than the Zetas' top-down military style. Point number 3 comes down to dollars and cents. The Jalisco group's bet on high-profit crystal production built a much sturdier war chest than the Zetas' reliance on shaking down locals. Dealing narcotics puts the police on your tail, but squeezing innocent shopkeepers turns the entire community into your enemy. Number 4 is all about keeping the boss in charge. El Mencho's knack for staying in the shadows while the Zetas' top brass got picked off gave his crew a massive edge that grew every year. Crews run by their creators just operate better than those managed by second-string substitutes. And fifth, the mental game is just as deadly as the bullets. That slaughter in Veracruz wasn't just a tactical win. Its true power lay in the absolute terror it instilled. It cracked the myth that the Zetas couldn't be touched and crowned the Jalisco crew as the new predators on the block. Sixth, it's not just how you hit, but when. The new guys struck right when federal heat had already softened up the Zetas. They didn't just brawl. They waited for the perfect moment of weakness and then went for the throat. Lastly, bloodshed creates a never-ending loop. The Jalisco Cartel took the crown by being more savage than the competition. But now, up-and-coming rivals are using that exact playbook against them, meaning the very violence that got them to the top guarantees they'll never sit comfortably on the throne. There is always a new challenger ready to be crueler, crazier, and more extreme. That conflict, sparked in Cancun back in 2009 with 3 corpses and a threat, is still raging today under different banners. The Zetas fell and Jalisco rose, but the nation is still footing the bill for that war and will be for generations. El Mencho did more than just beat the competition. He completely rewrote the rulebook for organized crime south of the border. He showed that commando skills aren't enough, you have to control the narrative too. He proved that a solid business model beats a good aim every time, building a dynasty that remains the heavyweight champion of the underworld. And that is exactly how a single figure dismantled the scariest syndicate the country had ever seen. It wasn't about having bigger guns or elite soldiers. It was about outthinking the enemy and striking at the perfect second. He understood a universal truth. In the streets, just like in business, what people believe is just as real as the truth. The moment the Zetas stopped looking untouchable, their entire kingdom crumbled. This saga redefined our grasp of modern power and terror, all tracing back to that grisly scene with 35 victims left outside a Veracruz shopping center on a random Tuesday afternoon.
The story of El Mencho and the fall of Los Zetas isn't a Hollywood thriller. It is a dark, undeniable tragedy written in the blood of innocent communities. We often look at these syndicates and see a twisted kind of genius empires built on calculated strategy, psychological warfare, and billions of dollars. But what is the actual cost? Underneath the strategic takeovers and the manipulative public relations lies a devastating truth. Violence only breeds more violence. The cartels didn't just destroy each other. They decimated families, corrupted institutions, and left entire generations living in the shadow of relentless fear. The rivers of wealth flowing from the narcotics trade didn't build cities. They bought weapons, funded massacres, and silenced the innocent. The ultimate lesson here isn't about how to seize power, but how the ruthless pursuit of it inevitably destroys everything it touches. There is no glory in a kingdom built on graves. The real tragedy is borne by the everyday people, the shopkeepers, the reporters, the families who simply try to hold on to their humanity when the world around them descends into chaos. We must remember their stories to ensure these dark chapters become warnings, never blueprints.